Coming up on this edition of the Shea Anything Podcast, we have an update on Javier Baez and conversations about Billy Eppler and where the Mets front office will go next. We also have updates on some of our careers, potentially the future of this podcast. It all starts right now. All right, welcome to the show, everybody. A reminder to subscribe to the Shea Anything Podcast wherever you're listening. We appreciate it. Give us a rate and review as well. And Shea Anything is brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on only on Verizon. So we have basically some news on Javier Baez, not dissimilar to and from what Andy had reported, I don't know, got to be a couple of months ago now, Andy, where you said
that they could sign him quickly.
Yeah, that Javier Baez and the Mets like each other and that his market could develop quickly. And I think I was surprised by that because I felt like everything was going to go slowly and wait for the December 1 deadline, et cetera. We'll get to that news a little bit later on in the show, and we'll talk about the loss of Aaron Loup and Billy Eppler and his hiring and what it might mean for who the Mets are going to go after in a second. First, and again, this is something that I wanted to address on the podcast. I just tweeted it out, and Andy and I are very similar in that talking about ourselves makes us fairly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But this will be my last Shea Anything podcast. I'm leaving SNY after 7 years with the network. It's been an amazing ride. When I got hired, I was 23 years old. I had been with the Yes Network actually for about a year and a half doing strictly digital stuff. So, Kurt Gowdy Jr. hired me, took a huge risk. I had never done live TV before. And I don't know. I said this to Kurt and Brad Como yesterday, that they knew what position I was in terms of whether I could succeed in it before I did often. So, they put me in the pregame show doing the 2015 postseason at Citi Field with Gary, Keith, and Ron. And I wouldn't have signed up for that. I wouldn't have raised my hand and been like, yeah, I'm ready for it. But they thought I was, and it turned out like it went okay. And every step of the way of my time here, they've put me in positions to succeed and given me basically exactly what I wanted to do. And what more can you ask? I mean, I grew up in this market. I grew up rooting for these teams. This is what I care about when I'm not working. So I haven't done anything at work that I didn't genuinely want to do for 7 years, which is crazy. Also feels crazy to be leaving, but for that reason. But I felt like, and I've said this in certain conversations, that at my age, and I'm 30, it was like, my goal is to go somewhere and kind of get outside my comfort zone, be a little bit less comfortable, try and grow. And, I'm so happy doing what I'm doing that I feel like I could happily retire one day doing what I'm doing. But there's that voice in your head that's like, try something else, see what else is out there for you. So that's what I'm doing. Nothing official or anywhere close to being able to tell anybody about a next move. I just don't know that information yet. So that's that. And as for the podcast, stay tuned to the feed, obviously. Like they say in baseball, the guys are in talks, nothing official, but my sources say they'll let you know soon. Andy will let you know soon. So you'll be hearing about the podcast. But are there any unanswered questions out there, Andy, that you would ask as a follow-up? Because Andy and I, by the way, just to say, Andy said very nice things on Twitter that are public. But, Jeff and Andy, they were both at a little dinner that I had last week. And both of them being there was really special to me. But Andy said such an eloquent, toast about my time at the network that is still kind of the main thing that I think of when I think of the nice things that people have said since learning about my departure. It was very meaningful to me. I've worked with Andy for a long time, and we've obviously worked very closely. So,
well, the audience for that toast was you and a small group of people, and that's one message. So I would just say, I'm glad I get two more opportunities because they're different audiences each time. It's Shea Anything, and then we'll be on BNNY tonight before you're really done with us. And for the listeners of the podcast, I would just say that of all the things that we do, it's funny because this to me was almost like, oh, can you do a podcast too, in addition to writing and TV? And it was a little bit of an afterthought to me when I started this. Sure, I'll do a podcast with Doug. That'd be fun, but that's just something off the side that we do. And the main thing that I have gotten approached on at Citi Field and around town and stuff that people say, hey, we know you. It's this. So I want to say we appreciate all you who have listened to this. Whatever happens with the podcast going forward won't be this, obviously, because what I would say that you guys out there are connecting with and enjoying it's not me. I'm annoying. It's Doug, who's a very engaging host. But it's also, I'll say that, the personal chemistry between me and Doug, which in a podcast is long, you can't fake. So it's been, I think you guys out there who are listening to this have gotten a really accurate distillation of our actual friendship, because I'm too busy and, frazzled to fake it on this thing. Like we're really, this is a real, you've heard something authentic, and that's because Doug brings something authentic. TV hosts are kind of caricatured as like presenting as phony, and Doug is anything but. So I think that's what's worked. I think that's what's worked for maybe some of our listeners about this podcast, and it's what we're losing. So it's just, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I didn't sugarcoat it in our toast you mentioned. I'm not going to sugarcoat it here. It's a loss. It's a bummer. It's a bummer for me, really. Like when you started the intro, I was like, I can't believe we don't get to do this again. I'm always like, oh, I'll get the podcast this week. I'm busy. But then I enjoy the conversation. So it sucks that this is the last one of those. And that's what I'll say. That's what I'll say to our podcast specific listeners. If you liked this, I think that's why. And both things have to do with you, Doug.
I appreciate it. And I too would like to thank everybody who listens and engages with us, because it has been a really fun project to take on. Because of the loyal listeners. Like, to your point, I was, TV people are approached a lot. Like, hey, do you want to do a podcast? Especially like generationally now it's different. Podcasts are kind of like growing and not an afterthought in any way, shape or form. But 5 years ago, old school TV people, which somehow we probably are and would be approached like, hey, do you want to do a podcast? It's like, yeah, sure. It's something I do on the side. And this quickly became like what I, not only do I look forward to it and I focus on it, but it's something that like, I could tell in terms of the fans that I interact with and the listeners and the viewers that it was something that was really popular and well-liked by those of you who listen. And it gives us a lot of pride. And by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Jason Pateri, Jeff Goldman, Max Fucci, everybody who's listened to this podcast. What they don't realize is that, in the hours before we started, Andy and I get a rundown from a producer that's been put together that is basically the perfect list and formula for how to, give you 30 minutes to update you once or twice a week on this team. And, Jason Pateri moved on from SNY, but he kind of got this thing off the ground with us too. And then Jeff Goldman took over, and I didn't really realize that like Jeff Goldman had time to dedicate himself to a podcast. But not only has he done that, but he's gone above and beyond really, in terms of not just, preparing us for the show, but also just growing the show, getting it sponsored, making sure it comes up in every meeting he's in. And I have really appreciated that, because ever since he took over, we've felt like more of a priority, and that's been fun because I think it helps us, not only take the show more seriously, but take it as seriously as it should be.
And I hope this little chat doesn't come across as a boring victory lap to all of you. I don't think it does or anything like that. But what we're really trying to do is pause for a second and show appreciation to everyone who's listened, appreciate it, and not just gloss over the fact that what we have all experienced together is ending. And that's a thing to take a moment on and say, we appreciate the people who are part of it, which includes especially everyone listening, even maybe more so than us.
And
go on. And then we're going to have a little fun before we talk about the Mets again.
Yeah. And I was just going to say that not only do we want to thank the people who are listening, but we just want to make the point that to the people who are listening, it's not just us. Like, we're not the only ones working on it.
Yeah.
A lot of work goes into it and went into it when we were in studio. And since we've been home, I mean, there's a recording process that I still am not at all involved in.
That's true. No, we just log on and talk. It's much less labor intensive.
All right. So in the rundown, it says, in the meantime, I've been told to toss it to Andy for some sort of memory lane segment.
Well, and again, this credit goes to this man, Jeff Goldman, who you mentioned, who's unknown to the public mostly, but who worked hard to put this together. I'm the Ron Burgundy reading from the prompter on this. I feel these memories, but Jeff deserves credit for putting it together. And the first thing that he has prepared for us is we are going to go back to the very beginning. Doug had just finished his fifth grade graduation. We were very proud of him. He was starting here. Well, it wasn't your beginning at SNY. So you were 7th, 8th grade by this time, but it was the first day of Shea Anything. The podcast didn't have a name. I wanted to call it Wilmer's Tears, but let's listen to a clip from the open of our very first episode.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Meet the Mets Cast. We'll be back to that name in just a second.
Very
Doug Williams here alongside Andy Martino. We're both doing video and audio. So we're here in SNY Studio 42. I believe we're in Studio 42.
We're in Studio 42, and we're off to a rousing start.
Yeah, tons of energy. So the name of this show, Meet the Mets Cast, the reason I said it like I did at the top is that
you're not excited about the name.
We're not in love with it. It's not something we're attached to.
We like the logo.
The logo's great, but we thought of a couple ideas last week just in workshopping. But the thing is that if you are listening to this or watching this, we would like your ideas. The two ideas that we flushed out, which is a pun in what I'm about to say.
Watch where he's going with this, folks.
We kind of like the Flush Hour podcast. It's a take on Rush Hour, obviously. Also a take on Mets in Flushing, Queens.
And you know, podcast kids are a little edgier than what you'd call traditional media. So it's like, hey,
we're just
flush.
Two guys sitting around.
We're so relaxed that we're going to say the word flush around here. So
and it's a toilet pun, but who cares? Because it's podcast.
I wasn't going to go there.
The other thing that we thought of, which in terms of a digital standpoint, I think might make a little bit more sense, is just the Mets Season Podcast, but it's like a hashtag is the name, and it's Season SZN. So,
you know, kids like hashtags.
Yeah, which I've also been told. Hashtag Mets Season Podcast. So those are just our two ideas. If you have any more out there and you're listening, which first of all, awesome, thank you. But give us some ideas.
My idea was Wilmer's Tears, but I don't think that's going to happen.
I don't think so.
It's cool.
All right. We both sound so young and chippy and inexperienced, and we had never heard of the phrase "Shea Anything" yet. Some reader came up with it soon after, and it was better than any of those terrible ideas. So one of the things that's been fun about this is that it's less formal than BNNY, if anything could be, but it actually is. So we've been able to workshop various things. I was proud of what was it? Willem Dafoe or Wilmer Defoe, my brief stint as a comedy writer. That's not what we're going to play, but Shea Anything Completist will remember that one. But we did workshop what became a big BNNY segment on this. So let's listen to
I don't remember
version of that.
Okay, so next segment's called and what this is a segment that we've done once on Baseball Night in New York. I'm not sure it went over well, but this is podcasting, Andy. This is different. So I'm going to say either a good or a bad thing, and it's either I don't think that's a big deal, or that could be a big deal.
This is a good segment. It's a good idea. I wasn't on the day you floated the trial balloon, which frankly must have been why it didn't work well.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't think
you got to have the talent.
It's not
in place.
that it didn't work badly. I'm not sure it was widely applauded. But I didn't get like tweets like that's hysterical.
We're doing this for critical acclaim,
right? Of course.
Wow. So you included just the tee up and not how it actually went on the show. That's good.
Yeah. Well, direct your complaints to the production staff. I'm just reading from a prompter here, but I remember that, and that's always been one of the fun things about this is that we can kick certain things around and see if we meet the high bar of Gerard Guilfoyle who doesn't think anything's funny. For
by the way.
BNNY.
Fairness to Gerard Guilfoyle, I clearly didn't think the first went well on BNNY, but we're doing it tonight. So we're doing it
tonight. That's right.
It has lasted years, and one of my favorite stories about viewer interaction at all is John Harper on like Jersey Transit one day, and a fan went up to him and was like, "Hey, Harp, or it's just like, it's become kind of a BNNY staple. So that's not going anywhere with my departure either.
No, that's here to stay, I'm sure. Sure. Okay, so you remember the whole debate early? We obviously dropped the My Saturday Night thing after a while organically. I think probably because, sadly, the Saturday Night in 2020 was always the same for everybody. But from the beginning, that came from the debate of whether either of us was cool and which one was. And you were so obviously the cool one outwardly, but then it sort of turned out that I had a more interesting life than you did. I think that's tapered off a little in the few years since. But anyway, My Saturday Night. Here we go.
Segment we're going to do at the end of each show, My Saturday Night. Now, what are you? You're in your 50s now?
53.
Anyway, I'm 27 years old. I live in Manhattan. Andy has a wife and a young son named Henry.
Live in the suburbs.
5 years old. You live in the suburbs. So our lives are very different. But Andy has been hammering me this past couple of weeks for like living some old, boring life. And so we're going to do this segment called My Saturday Night. It's not going to be a long thing. We want to say what we did on Saturday night. You start.
I went to a birthday party at someone's house. The uncool part about it is it was a 50th birthday party. But the cool part about it is there was a live band, there was an open bar, and it was fully catered. And
live band for a 50th birthday party. Were any of the people in the band wearing like pleated khakis? Was it that?
No, it was a
Hawaiian
bluegrass
shirts?
band. So it was like, it had a hipster bent to that. It was like everybody liked, the people that hosted the party liked bluegrass, but there may have been a slight ironic nod to, hey, it's a bluegrass band.
You did say that your town in Jersey is filled with Brooklynites.
That's right. I used to live in Greenpoint, Williamsburg, and there is a feeling of hipster irony that has now carried over to the nearby suburbs because none of us can afford homes in the city. That's neither here nor there. But I think I had I had 3 martinis.
You were drinking, what a fascinating sounding party.
Listen to this too. The first 2 martinis were strong enough where when I wanted the third, the bartender was like missing. He was somewhere else. So I reached over the bar and made myself one in the thing.
That's
a pretty cool night.
That's such a you thing to do because you probably left the place a mess, like pouring vodka.
No, he came back mid-pour and he was not happy.
Okay, My Saturday Night, it started in the evening hours. I went over to visit my friends in Brooklyn. I was in Gowanus.
Okay, well, that's kind of hip.
Yeah, it was hip.
That's more than I thought you were going to bring to this.
Yeah, and then I went out to dinner. We got Chinese food at a very simple, regular, standard Chinese food place in Brooklyn Heights. Then
Not hip.
Not hip. Then I took a cab home, and I went to bed.
What time were you asleep on Saturday
usually
night?
1:30 a.m.
Okay, well, you got me beat there. I was sleeping by 11:30.
Yeah.
We had to relieve the babysitter.
Even with the live.
So there are limits to my coolness.
All right, so this has been the Meet the Mets cast with Doug Williams and Andy Martino. I'm not sure it'll be Meet the Mets cast
Wilmer's
in 1
tears.
week from now.
Oh my God!
Hello. What a great ending! And because we ended it being like, I'm not sure how long it'll be this. But by the way, Animating Sports did the short animation for that. It still cracks me up with. They made the name of they made the restaurant, obviously the Chinese restaurant that I was talking about. And the sign on the front of the restaurant is exactly how I describe it. It's like a simple, standard Chinese place.
Yeah, that was really cool. There's a lot going on, a lot to talk about with that.
A lot to unpack. Yep.
There's a lot, like my friend Phil, who turned 50 that night, who's now 54, is a sense of how many years have passed. We were talking about that recently, that he couldn't believe that a cartoon was made out of his 50th birthday party. And finally, I will say that was the only My Saturday Night where your story wasn't, I cooked for my parents. That was like the coolest one you ever had.
That's true. That's true. Although, what's funny is I get made fun of by you and the public for hanging out with my parents too much. And my parents make fun of me because I'm always schlepping to Brooklyn to see my friends that live in Brooklyn. So it's like, whether I go to Brooklyn, I'm called.
Perspective, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, Doug, when we made it to episode number 2, we had a name. Let's take a listen to that. The debut of this name that we still have.
It's Shea Anything. It's not Meet the Mets cast, episode 2.
Nor is it Wilmer's tears, but I'd like to point out at my suggestion, we did get some positive feedback on that.
It's interesting, the social media that we've gotten ever since our first episode, one of the tweets that we got was nice, saying, I love Andy Martino and Doug Williams. I get a lot of them on Baseball Night in New York, and suggested to SNY to bring back the guys who used to host this podcast. I wasn't sure how to take that, because it means
Probably not well. I mean, it's not a compliment.
In most things on social media, you shouldn't take it well. So, Shea Anything is what we're going with. I believe, unless I'm wrong, the first person to suggest it was at the Knuckler on Instagram. He came up with the name.
It's good.
She came up with
I like it. I didn't think that we were going to get one that would prevent me from complaining about the rejection of Wilmer's tears through the year, but Shea Anything is solid. I'm happy with it.
Yeah. Shea It Ain't So was another. I didn't
That's
even
pretty good. The Weezer reference.
Yeah, consider the options from Shea Stadium, but we're very psyched to have it off the ground, off and running. Shea Anything. I have not seen the John Cusack movie that's based on.
Well, you're not old, Doug. That's one thing you're not.
That's true.
Still haven't seen it. Never saw it. I just know it has something to do with him holding a boombox to play music for, I don't know.
It's dated. I'll probably offend someone by saying that, but it was a good title for us. I've got one more, or Jeff has one more that he prepared, and he did a lot of work on this. I think you'll enjoy it. So this is like, the theme here is that this is the part of the show where you usually do the mid-show sponsor read, which we haven't done yet.
I was hoping that it didn't have something to do with the sponsor reads.
Which has always been, that was a tremendous challenge for me to figure out how to get through one of those. It's the sponsor read has caused a lot of discussion on this show. Jeff assembled a bit of a montage here. I'm not going to say anything more. Just listen. Just take a listen.
You're listening to the Shea Anything Podcast, brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G, built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. You're listening to the Shea Anything Podcast, brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G, built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. You're listening to the Shea Anything Podcast, brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G, built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. You're listening to the Shea Anything Podcast, brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G, built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. You're listening to the Shea Anything Podcast, brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G, built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon.
So, Jeff provided backing there in this order: blues rock, heavy metal, inspirational, action movie, triumphant, and the emotional, sort of with the feels, which is what we're all feeling right now. Which did you prefer of all those special backing musics? And then you're going to go ahead and resume our Mets talk.
I think I preferred the last one. And it was while I was listening to the last one where I realized that what we just listened to was basically a front for Verizon, who's definitely been made aware of the fact that we're giving them like 6 times their average promotion.
Good deal for Verizon today.
Yeah. So Jeff's like, I'm going to do something fun. I'm going to play a bunch of Doug's reads, and Verizon's actually going to cash in on this / SNY is going to cash in on this. But by the way I end that read on its own is very weird. It sounded like a song. It was like, only on Verizon. Like I was about, like, I don't know, something strange going on there.
Well, but you knew it was coming, I guess, somehow.
True.
So that's a retrospective.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Andy. This has been a very fun ride.
Yep. Hey, how about Javier Baez? Our poor listeners want to know.
By the way, no, I just want to say that if you're a listener and you're however long we are into this podcast and you're like, is this the time where they actually talk about the team? Are they talking about why I listen? Yes. Here it begins. What you'd actually like to hear and listen to. So Andy reported right before the podcast and was kind enough to send his little mini column along before we started that his reporting on Javier Baez from months ago has progressed to the point where the Mets are among several teams in on Javier Baez, who intends to sign before that December 1st CBA negotiation window closes and we get into a potential freeze. Andy, what's the latest?
Yeah. So what I learned today, just before we started taping, that is not entirely new, but it's meaningful because it's on track with what we've heard before, that the Mets could strike quickly on Baez. There's actually a chance the Mets had a shot at Baez in October before he even got to other teams. That obviously didn't happen. They didn't have a general manager at the time, among other reasons. But what's new here is that I'm hearing that Baez and Corey Seager are two of the shortstops who have the best chance to sign before this expected lockout, which would come after the CBA expires at the end of the day on December 1st. That is kind of new information because it tells me that there's momentum right now to Baez's free agency. He's kind of deep enough in talks where he could say, yeah, he's going to pick within the next couple of days. And the Mets are right there in the mix. And the talks have continued since Billy Eppler took over on Thursday evening. So that's where we're at. I wouldn't expect Javier Baez news any minute, but any day for sure. And by the way, talking to agents, they are just blown away by how busy free agency is right now. This deadline, this December 1st deadline really has focused the market like we haven't seen in years at an early point, because it's probably a bunch of players who as human beings want to know where they're going to work next year. They don't want to wait months and months and months to find out. So there's just a lot of action right now. We saw a lot of pitchers sign yesterday. We're just going to see more and more. I'm really very happy about this, how way this will impact my Thanksgiving break, which will be non-existent apparently, but this is the way it is. It's almost certainly going to be quiet starting December 2nd for a while, but until then, there's going to be a lot of action, and that action will likely include Baez.
Yeah, two pitchers signed just while we were doing Baseball Night in New York live last night from 6 to 6:30. We got the news about DeSclafani and Alex Wood, and it just, it's a market that has been heating up way faster than I thought it would. Can I just say though, because look, we're coming off of the news that Steven Matz is at least considering the Mets, and the Mets are considering him. And, the Mets obviously have been tied to Javi Baez all offseason. He was, obviously acquired by them last year. I do have a fundamental issue with the Mets' tendency to bring guys back. And I know that they don't think that way. And we've seen in the past that they do have a tendency to do it because they don't think that way. It's almost as if they look at, numbers on paper. And then if the name happens to be attached to a guy who played for your team a year ago or 3 years ago, whatever, they bring that guy back. And they're not signing Steven Matz because they have a romantic feeling about his time with the team.
Yeah.
But I look back at, years of, not getting all the way to the top. And, I thought the best thing for Matt specifically was a change of scenery, and he got one. He performed pretty well in Toronto. Like, why do we think the results will be different if the Mets continue to bring back guys who were part of teams that weren't able to get over the top? Do you think that's a fair criticism?
Yeah, it's not ideal that Matz is basically he is the guy on the market that makes a lot of sense right now. This thing is moving so fast that I actually had a story that I filed, like the one about Aaron Loup, that included a paragraph that said, and Anthony DeSclafani is a real possibility for the Mets. Keep an eye on that. And then we had to pull it out before we published the story because DeSclafani signed with the Giants. So there's there's a handful of guys like DeSclafani, Wood, Matz, it's like the second or third tier starters on this market. And the Mets want to sign a minimum of 2 and as many as 3 starting pitchers. That's what I was told yesterday. So you can't afford to be picky about Steven Matz. So they want him because he's one of those guys, not because he ever played him. But I agree that he became one of those guys as soon as he left. So that would have to give you some pause.
Yeah. And, I've mentioned these names before, but I think of Jerry's Familia, and I think of Jay Bruce, and, look, both of those signings span different front office hierarchies. So it might just be one of those things that I just kind of irrationally hold against the team, that there's not facts to bring it,
On a visceral level, it's not exciting. It's not a shiny new toy.
Right.
And also for Matz, even more than those guys you mentioned, he's from here. And it's really hard to play where you're from for a lot of guys. Ticket requests and attention and Long Island Steven Matz every day at Newsday. And, there might have been something about, I'm sure there were other reasons why he saved his career last year, but I wouldn't be surprised if relieving that pressure was part of it. So if I'm him, I would even more than if I'm the Mets. I would be like, am I really sure that this is the place to be? I guess once he signs a contract, it doesn't really matter that much. He's achieved the goal. But you know what I'm saying. I agree with you that it seems a little dicey in a way.
I think, it's interesting that, and it's not just the Mets franchise. I think Mets fans get very attached to players who perform well here, and Mets fans oftentimes want their guys to be re-signed. But the problem is that if you bring back the same team from, say, 2021, how can you expect different results? So there's going to need to be fresh blood here. There's going to need to be, a shaking things up process that, maybe you bring in big free agents. And I know Andy, especially because Andy was, hosting or co-hosting with Jim Duquette, the coverage when Billy Eppler officially took the job in the news conference, that I think it's going to be an off season of signings and of spending. And I just think that if the first two were to be Javier Baez and Steven Matz, that would, if I were a Met fan, that would not necessarily excite me, because Javier Baez, it's not his responsibility to single-handedly bring the Mets to the postseason. But although he played well, I would describe his time in a Met uniform as fairly turbulent. So
that's fair.
Speaking of Eppler, what did you think of his news conference, and what did you think it told us in terms of what might be next, especially not just for player personnel, but also an ex-manager?
I thought the news conference was fine. I think everyone's getting sick of having no pageantry at these things. It was a shaky Zoom connection for a while. I don't know. It would be nice if everyone could wear a suit and eat hors d'oeuvres in a Caesars Club or whatever, the Mike Piazza Club or whatever it's called now. That's what that kind of thing is for. I thought it was good that Disha from the Daily News and Dan Martin from the New York Post asked him about the Mickey Callaway hire. Those are important questions. I thought the answers were okay, not particularly specific. But in terms of his ability to run the Mets and do well, I don't think the press conference told you much, other than he is a nice, genuine guy, was very enthusiastic and intelligent. And that's what I think he is. So beyond the press conference, I think it's a good choice. I don't know if he'll succeed, because who knows, but a lot of that's out of his control, out of any GM's control. But I do know that they chose someone who's got the right background, the right skills, has done this before. And so it's been a good little start so far. I think they made a really good choice for GM.
What have you learned since he got the job about the types of signings he may prefer going to this offseason and manager hires as well?
Well, I know that collaborative is really important to him. So like when he's talking about manager hires, his first thought isn't, what do I value in a manager? It's, I want to meet with the group, see what kind of manager they're looking for. Because if they say, we want a plug and play guy who's done this before, then he says, okay, I got John Farrell and Buck Showalter. If they say, we want someone who's willing to really manage with like a priority on the analytics, okay, I got Joe Espada for you. Or, he's not married to one particular type. And I think that's genuine. He wants to know what the existing front office wants. And that will apply to players too, because he's coming in. It is literally like, what's an analogy? I don't know. He's like jumping on a treadmill going 18 miles an hour at the time he took this job. Like free agents say, bam, if you don't get some pitchers before the end of this month, you're going to have a bad year next year. Go, go, go. So he has to trust the evaluations that have been made by the front office that's already here, and then use his own leadership and instincts and negotiating to get deals across the finish line. But he doesn't have the luck. I mean, he's he came up under Brian Cashman. He likes hitters who can work the count and make what they call good swing decisions. Like, you can look at certain things, but overall, he just has to be the leader of a group that's already working and kind of defer a little bit right now.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong. The first, maybe it was the Lindor presser when they made the trade. Wasn't it Jared Porter and Sandy Alderson?
Yeah, I think so. There was one that was both of them. It was probably that one.
Right. And so I find it interesting that, they just hired a level of general manager, a level of front office executive who, let's say in a week, the Mets sign Baez. It'll just be him. Like we're no longer right. We're no longer
Probably.
living in.
I was a little surprised that Alderson said, we're going to work together and then I'm going to back off and he'll have a little bit of a learning curve.
Yeah. He said he's going to work.
He's done it before.
He'll report to me. Right.
Right. I thought that clearly Eppler's done this and Porter and Zach Scott hadn't when they started. So I don't think Eppler needs much supervision. And so I would think one would hope that Alderson wouldn't be there on that news. I'm not, it's a whole other conversation. There's nothing wrong with Sandy Alderson being involved in baseball operations. My point is he doesn't need to babysit the same way he did early on last time.
Yeah. I just think that I'd be surprised to see him in those things moving forward. And I think that in terms of this hire, it was kind of sold as Billy Eppler is going to be running baseball ops. Okay. So if the Mets make a big move, our next news conference should just be him. He should be the face of any baseball ops decision.
I agree.
And, Jared Porter, Zach Scott, even though, they're not here for the reasons they're not here, they were always seen as a level of general manager that probably was under Sandy Alderson to the point where he was still on those exactly. News conferences because they didn't hire who they wanted to hire.
That's right. And Scott was on his way off of that. Alderson was there at the trade deadline news conference, but he didn't really say much until he was asked questions. And I later found out didn't say much in the room either. Zach Scott ran the trade deadline and they were going more and more in that direction. So yes, I expect that to be sooner with Eppler.
Do you think, and I think this will kind of wrap up our latest with the Mets conversation, because I think you've gotten everything. Although I'll ask you one question about the lockout in a second. Do you think that they didn't get to Aaron Loup's number with the Angels because they've been kind of like victimized by good season, bad season, good season, bad season, too many times with relievers?
Not the Mets specifically, but teams. Yeah. I mean, honestly, if you're looking at this rationally, 2 years and $17 million for a reliever coming off a career year is bad business, period. So I think that's more like any team could get burned by that. I don't think it's the Mets specifically on that one. That's just not a good idea. It doesn't mean like the counter to that I've heard is like, well, Steve Cohen has the money. It's like, well, yeah, but he's not going to spend it stupidly. You could get 2 starting pitchers, like 4 or 5 starting pitchers, maybe on 1-year deals with that money. Maybe not 2 at this point. Everything's really expensive right now, but you could do a lot more with that money. And you also have to trust your staff to find next year's Aaron Loup, not pay the real Aaron Loup for last year. That's how this works. That you have to have a churn of these guys. So that's what they did. I mean, I just don't think that the Angels are doing some crazy stuff right now with their pitching decisions and what they're paying. And I think it's only going to hurt Mets fans in the moment because I don't think these are good decisions for the Angels.
Yeah, the good decisions don't end there. I'm taking a job as
That's
one
right.
of one of their starting pitchers. So
job.
They're clearly making a bunch of really
we need Baez to sign with the
decisions.
Angels too, just for comic value. Everything.
I've gotten a mixture of responses that have been, are you going to the Angels or / are you taking over with the 11th hour on MSNBC? And if I get that text, I say, my dad really wanted BNNY. So they're pushing me out. That's kind of what's really happening.
I think we should leave people with that you have never acknowledged who your dad is on this show once in all these years. So let's Doug just opened it up. Let's leave it there.
Yeah.
Say hello, goodbye.
Well,
that shows that Doug has made himself vulnerable to you.
Before I do that, I had a comment on what you just said, which was that it sounds unromantic and it sounds like something that will annoy Mets fans to say that the Mets were right not to pay Aaron Loup that money. But it's just nobody gets paid for what they've done anymore. And I feel like Aaron Loup did, and good for him. This is his first big time payday in the big leagues, but doesn't mean it's a good idea. And it's just the truth. And so, especially with a reliever, look, the front office didn't think that was a price worth matching. And if Aaron Loup pitches to a 4 ERA next year, nobody's going to be shocked because it's just the way it seems to be working with relievers.
Yeah. Sometimes you get burned on these things. The Mets didn't bring back LaTroy Hawkins one year when they should, and I mean, he had a good year in Colorado. But oftentimes, it's just like we use the phrase "prisoner of the moment" a lot on this show, and like I just remember the giant emergency when the Mets didn't sign Brad Hand, and then he came back as like a Scrivini in September. You know, it's like these things change fast with relievers. But anyway, go ahead, say something.
It's true. As for the December 1 deadline,
yes,
has anything changed there?
No. I mean, I will say that there's just from the MLB side, there's a little of like, and from the agent side, there's a little bit of like, you never know. We've done deals in the last minute before. They're not totally ruling it out, but certainly not much optimism in the industry. And the market is clearly operating with an assumption that there will be a lockout because it's accelerated right now. Like a deadline actually is kind of nice in the offseason because it's getting things going that didn't have to wait until February. So clearly, agents by doing these deals this week are signaling that they expect a lockout. So that is what it is.
So you would have thought, at least I would have thought sitting at home, oh, these players signing is a good thing. It means everybody's happy. But in reality, it's hurry up and get ready to wait.
Yes,
so,
most likely.
All right. So as I said at the top of the show, keep an eye on the feed in terms of what will happen next with Shea Anything. Maybe it'll go back to Meet the Mets cast. Maybe it'll be, what was the Flushing one?
Flushing, I don't know. It was bad.
Some of those ideas where it was good that we left that behind. Although the other Shea idea was good. Why am I forgetting all of them now? What was the Shea Ain't So? Shea Ain't So.
Yeah, that was not bad.
But anyway, everybody who listens to this, thank you so much for interacting, for listening. I really appreciate it. And it really means a lot. And Andy, Jeff, I miss working with you both. It's been a blast. And this has been a really fun kind of look back at some of our best and more forgettable moments in the podcast history. And thank you for listening, everybody. A reminder, keep subscribing, rate and reviewing the podcast. We appreciate it. And for the last time, Shea Anything is brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network. More people rely only on Verizon. I did that partially off script. Very proud of myself after all these years. It's like
built right.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Yes, built right. Thanks for listening, everybody.